Okay, so we're here to talk about the power of failure. This is Bob Fornell. I'm here with Shamir and Lewis. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a second. I am a. Here we go. Oh my God. We're going to leave the mistakes in tonight, I think.
Let's
There we
do
go.
it.
I am a senior solutions developer. I've been writing code going on 40 plus years. I've been writing code professionally for about the last 12. And in this talk, we're going to cover a lot of the mistakes I've seen and or made myself along the way. So let's get into.
Everyone. My name is Shamir. I am currently a technologist at Strategio. I'm also a content creator of a brand called Zona, which is another name I go by. And I am a community manager of a server that goes by the Zona tribe. And I have high interest in developer advocacy.
And I'm glad
Nice
you're
to meet you guys.
paying attention because I completely lost track of what I wanted to say there for a split second. So thank you for keeping me in line there, Shamir. So, Lewis.
What's going on, everybody? My name's Lewis. You can call me Lou. I'm a technologist at Strategio. Ever since I built my first PC, I started getting interested in technology and started writing code. I'm the co-host of a Twitter space, the Boba and Cherry Cafe, and I am also a community manager at the Zona Tribe Discord server.
We need to add that one later.
Yes,
All
it's
right.
okay.
So I love this list of steps to success. I'll let you guys talk a little bit here.
Yeah, so I see the okay steps to success. Pretty much the common denominators to try, and if things don't work out, try again. I think that's really awesome and encouraging, especially in a day and age. Well, personally, I'm a perfectionist, so I like to hope to get things right the first time, but in reality, that's not always the case. So I think this is awesome to that when things do hit the fan or fail or don't go as you plan to keep trying. How about you, Louis?
Yeah, this is great because honestly, one of the biggest things that leads us to success is failing, trying, failing, and then learning from said failure to make sure it doesn't happen again, or learning a way to get around it and do something even better. So I'm looking forward to this talk and these points. I could not agree with them more.
Yeah, I've always liked this list. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You've got to continuously keep trying. Okay, so here on the next slide, um, I love the Michael Jordan quote there on his missed shots. And Lewis, I think you were the one that pointed that one out to me way back when we first started putting this together. Am I wrong?
I I don't think so. I'm not sure. I am a Michael Jordan fan, but I'm not sure if I ever mentioned this, but I mean Google is like your your best friend, especially for a software engineer. I remember the first time we saw you code, Bob, and we we thought that you're supposed to know everything as a developer, and the first time we saw you Googling something, we felt, much better about ourselves. Like, oh, okay, you're not supposed to know everything, just know where to find that solution.
Well, and one of the things I tried to point out there was it wasn't that I knew it or didn't know it. I knew where to find it, but at the same time, I want to verify my knowledge. This is an industry that changes continuously. JavaScript itself has had changes over the years. HTML changes over the years. CSS changes over the years. And it's very rare that I see every change as it comes out, that I know every change that's coming. So as I search things, that even things that I know, part of why I'm doing that is to verify that I haven't missed something.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
100%, yes.
Um,
Yes.
in the finding of resources. MDN is a tremendous resource out there. Source documentation,
Yes.
solid information. But I tell folks, I'm pretty sure I did that even one of our first conversations, is look for newsletters to sign up for that cover those areas. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, libraries, frameworks that you're working with. You want to know when breaking changes are coming out. The perfect example, and I may talk about it a little bit later on in another slide, when I worked at my previous company, came in on one Monday to be told that my front end code was broken, which I found really odd, and I had questioned that fact because we had pushed that code to production 3 months before. There hadn't been any updates. So how does code break that worked right for 3 months? Seemed a little strange to me. Now, I went out and it did take me 3 days to find what was going wrong. I had a series of drop downs at the top of the page that weren't opening up. And what I eventually figured out was it was a CSS issue, but I had to dig in further because that CSS worked for 3 months. And what I found out was there was a CSS update that came out. I wasn't paying attention to what the industry was doing. Because of that, my code broke without me doing anything to break it. Okay, so these newsletters, early on, I read every article that came out because they were all cool and interesting, exciting. It's a new industry. I'm learning new things. These
Hmm.
days, I read probably one a week, two a week. Still, that interest. But what I'm looking for is, hey, we got this breaking new thing that's coming out. Hey, we got this cool new thing that's going to make your life easier. I want to read those. I want to know in advance if I got some new tool or if something's going to break. Okay. Make
Hmm.
sense?
Yep.
All right.
100%.
Yes.
So moving on here to perfect code. Thoughts?
There's no such
And
thing as perfect code.
The best code is
uh,
no code at all, right?
yeah, exactly.
right.
It's perfect in my head. It really is. Code is perfect in my head. When I start putting that code down, when I start typing it into the IDE, that's where mistakes happen, right? We spell things wrong. We forget to call the function. You forget to save the file. I did that, I think, the last presentation that you guys recorded with me, right? But we learn from those mistakes. It, yeah, maybe it takes me 2 or 3 minutes to realize I didn't save the file, or 5 minutes to
Oh
find
man.
out that I spelled a variable wrong. Yeah, it still takes me a couple hours to figure out I forgot to call the function, right? But this is all an iterative cycle. This is something that over time you go back at it over and over and over again. There are some basic things you look for. There's a reason that rubber ducking is such an important tool. You got somebody
Yeah.
else you can bounce that idea off of. I mean, I'll be honest, I've had coworkers that I've reached out to at the level I'm at going, I can't find the error here. What in the world's going on? Only to have that dev walk around the desk, look at my code, and say, you might want to save the file. Ooh, oh yeah, okay, that would help. And I've probably done the same to them dozens of times as well. Okay, it happens to all of us. The only perfect code is in your head.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't write for perfect code. We write code that works, that's functional. And we cover the majority of the issues we think we could run into. And trust me, end users will find ways to abuse your code when it gets into production, to use it in ways that you never expected. Okay? Yeah, shooting for perfection is a quick way to drive yourself bonkers, right? What did Leon call it? The trough of sorrow?
Trough of
You
sorrow.
could spend a lot
Yes.
of time there if you're trying to write perfect code, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, Failure comes in a lot of forms, right? What are your thoughts here?
Let's see. So failure comes in many forms. Code that doesn't work, code that code that doesn't do what is expected, code that isn't testable, code that isn't manageable, code that isn't readable. Um, yeah, I mean, I could agree with that. And can you explain to me what this chart is explaining here?
So, I mean, it's a road, and this road is perseverance road. We want to persevere. We
Okay,
have difficulties. We make mistakes. Things get in our way. How many times are you trying to write code and something's hitting wrong? Something's bugging you. I have
yep.
a neighbor who collects trash. And every day at lunchtime, his dump truck is outside my house, the diesel engine running the entire hour, and my entire house is vibrating. Okay, this is a distraction. This is an obstacle. Could lead to failure. Okay, we persevere. We push through. Eventually, we reach that success. Our dreams and hopes are right along with that perseverance and that hard. We know that it takes hard work and perseverance to get there. You can get stuck in this loop of distraction, being unhappy, sometimes wanting to give up, right? And feeling unfulfilled. You get stuck over there fairly quickly if you're not careful, right? But again, it's a journey. This whole thing is a journey. We talk about here about code that doesn't work, code that doesn't do what we expect it to do. I mean, that's pretty straightforward stuff in terms of failure, right? Code that isn't
Right.
testable. Well, you guys haven't quite got to that level. I don't need to spend a whole lot of time there, but code that isn't manageable. Perfect example of that with a previous client that I've worked with. 6,000 line file. 6,000 lines of code. 6,000 lines of code that works reasonably well. My first thought is let's break that up into much smaller units. But it works
Hmm.
reasonably well, and it's a core piece in what they do. So honestly, unless they have to, they don't touch it. If there are pieces that are broken, that they found some weird glitch in the code, some failure, they go fix that piece. They abstract it out. They write tests against that part. But the core chunk of that code, 6,000 lines, it's barely manageable. It's not abstracted. We can't refactor it easily. There are a lot of hard coded values or patterns within that code. That makes it hard to read and understand. Okay? Readable code. Readable code can be as simple as indenting properly.
Yeah.
One of the things I used to say that one of the core things I got out of college, out of 4 years of working on a computer science degree, was I learned to indent and space things properly. Now, it wasn't until I was a senior developer that I realized there was a lot more I got from college than spacing and indenting. But spacing and indenting is important when it comes to readability and being able to understand what you're looking at. Now, there's the flip side of readability, which is optimizing your code so severely that it then becomes unreadable in and of itself. You get those you've done leak codes and code wars, and you see those simple one-liners, right? Some of those
Hmm.
simple one-liners are insanely difficult to understand what they're doing.
Yep.
That's not the code you want in production. That's not the code you want that next developer to see, right?
Right.
And then the last one on here, you didn't mention the referenced code changes, and this is a failure that sometimes is unexpected. And what I'm talking about here are third-party libraries. You import all these third-party libraries, right? So just to use Angular or React, your
Yeah.
node modules folder gets huge, right? All this third-party stuff. Well, it is very possible that code from one of those can change and cause everything to start failing. Okay.
Mm.
Um, and don't forget the failure can also come from industry changes. We just talked about that one. I had production
Yeah.
code fail and the code didn't change. Working
Mm.
code failed because of a CSS change, a browser change. I mean, this industry continuously evolves. This is going to happen to you. Okay?
Yeah.
Right.
Or somebody on your team. Okay? So, good code. I'll read this little story here. Okay? Woman was at a
Okay.
dinner party. She was seated next to a pleasant older gentleman. They began to chat. It came up that he worked at the U.S. Treasury. Oh, really? She said. What do you do there? I investigate suspected counterfeit money, he said. Really? She said. That must be fascinating, exciting work. He shrugged. What were some of the best counterfeits you've seen? I bet you have good stories. Not really. And she wanted to know why not. I spend all of my time studying real bills. I study the lines of the engraving, the marks from the different Federal Reserve District seals, the Treasury seals, the fine lines in the portraits, and the engravings on the obverse. I know the features of the bills better than I know my own face. So when I see a counterfeit, I just know. I point out the error. I don't try and break it down and memorize it. I just know. Then I forget about it and I go back to true bills. So I like this story because, you know, it's the same with code. And let's be honest, at your level, you haven't seen a lot of good code or bad code. Over time, you'll see, hopefully, more good code than bad. Right? So as you see that code, when you start to see bad code, when you see code that's written poorly, something stands out as different. Because you've seen enough good code over time that it just jumps out at you. Does that make sense?
Yes. 100%.
Yes.
Okay. So I did forget to take the mistake out on this slide, but we're going to not worry about that. Again, another story. You know, Albert Einstein wrote this on a blackboard. 9 times 1 is 9, 9 times 2 is 18, 9 times 3 is 27. Get all the way down here, 9 times 9 is 81, 9 times 10 is 91. In class, they mocked him. They made fun of him because he had made a mistake. Correct answer for 9 times 10 is 90, right? He waited for everybody to quiet down and said, despite me answering the first 9 questions correctly, no one congratulated me. Instead, when I got something wrong, everyone started to laugh. This means that despite being very successful, society only notices a small mistake and makes fun of it. I like this last sentence here. Don't let simple criticism destroy your dreams. Okay. Now, I'll point out that this quote is misattributed. It did not come from Albert Einstein. I was never able to track down where it did come from. Okay. But there's a couple things you could take away. And the biggest one I put on here was the only people that don't make mistakes are those that don't do anything.
Mhm.
Right.
Right?
That's right.
And maybe we ought to take a look at those small successes, even if we had a failure. You know, how often am I talking to you guys, or I'm talking to other devs and 100 devs, and you've seen me cheer them on Twitter, you know, that, hey, my code's not working. I'm feeling horrible. I'm having a really bad day. Well, have you gone back and looked at what you've done over the last year? I tell developers all the time, go back and look at some of your first examples of code. Are those easier or harder than when you first looked at them? Right? Just because you had a failure today doesn't mean you haven't learned anything. It doesn't mean you're not growing. Failure is a part of life. In fact, that's usually where I learn the most. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to let you guys start here. So, failure.
So with failure, it says it's okay to not know everything, and that is something I could attest to throughout my coding journey. Because I had the misconception in the beginning that I had to memorize everything. And so once I was able to network and speak with actual engineers and learn that wasn't the case, that was very relieving for me. And that you're always going to be a student. You're never going to get to a point where you 100% master coding. Um, Instead, you'll always be a student, and I think that's something that's very reassuring that you're always going to grow. And yeah, like Bob says, if I was to look at my first code like now, it probably looks so easy
Yeah, and
compared to what I'm learning
you
now.
probably struggled pretty hard with that early on.
Right,
Okay,
right,
one of the things that I've realized over time is failure is just me moving forward. It's another step. That it's really most of my job satisfaction are on the small wins. You know, I solved that code that's driving me nuts. Whether that failure extends over 5 minutes or 5 hours doesn't matter. I get to that win. That's where I'm happy. That's where I'm motivated. That's where I feel productive and creative. Right?
Yep.
right.
So the next one here, best practices. What are your thoughts here, guys?
Always depend on context. It's better to know more practices and how to adapt them depending on the context. What I take from this is it goes back to me, trying to solve a problem in a code or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
While I do not know exactly how to solve it at first, I want to know what's going on in it and how it's failing, and then at the same time develop that problem solving skill in order to tackle onto that said problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, always take the necessary steps to get to the solution, even though it's not a first try or less than two steps kind of thing.
So when you guys have been learning all this time, you've seen articles, you've read videos on best practices, right?
Hmm.
On
Hmm.
even simple stuff, indenting and organization, and it's always best practice to do something here in CSS rather than in JavaScript. You've heard this kind of stuff, right?
Right,
And you know, it's always good to learn these best practices, but I always try and point out that there's a counterbalance to this too. Best practices are guidelines. They're not
Hmm.
fixed rules, okay? Because they're guidelines, there will be cases where you may break that best practice, okay? And I like this last one. Always strive to simplify. You know, I don't even remember that first time. I mean, I know I've seen it multiple times where um, I've been working on a chunk of code and I'm trying to get something solved and I'm writing more and more code. I write this code and hey, and now I've got this side effect, and then I have to write something else to accommodate that, and then hey, I have to write another piece to accommodate that. And I have that aha moment, and it takes some time sometimes, and I hope you get them quickly. But that aha moment is usually when I realize that it doesn't have to be more complex to solve the problem. It's quite often simpler. It's a simple solution. It's something where you actually reduce the amount of code to make it work
Yeah.
properly. Had a solution with a client that was several thousand lines of code, something like 3-4 thousand lines of code, and it was in a simple API service. Front end reaching out to the back end, and an API service that has to connect to, let's say, half a dozen different endpoints. I mean, you should only be talking 200 lines of code max. And so to see thousands of lines of code for me was disturbing in and of itself, having to read through all of that. But what I realized was these developers had actually built a model to mock things out when they were offline into the main code base. This wasn't testing where they mocked and stubbed and the things in the testing. This was they built a way so that if they set a flag, they got mock data on the fly from the code. And there are times where that's appropriate, but for production code, that code bloat is horrible. I was actually able to take that down to about 180 lines of code. Thousands of lines of code removed. You don't think that program ran a little bit faster because we removed close to 3,000 lines of code? Those elegant solutions. I mean, they really jump out at you as this is good. This is a really good thing. And when you start to see that, it's a really powerful thing. And I would hope when you guys look back at some of your previous solutions, you might see, hey, here's a simpler way
Yeah,
to do it. I've now seen enough to realize that there are better ways to do that, right? So
Yeah.
as we start to wrap up here, Thomas Edison, you know, he didn't fail. He never saw it as failure. He found 10,000 ways to make a light bulb that didn't work. That's a lot of ways it didn't work, right?
Yeah.
But nobody remembers his failures. What they remember is that light bulb that's blinding me over here, right? I mean, I'm sure you guys
Mhm.
can see that. Failure is understood, and especially when you're writing code, failure has to be an accepted part of what you do. You're going to write code
100%.
that doesn't work probably significantly more often than you write code that does work right. And honestly, we learn more from failure than we ever do from successes. Any thoughts there? Any great
Yeah,
examples that I haven't? I give you my examples all day long, but
I would say so how on my resume, on my portfolio, the projects that I like to put in there are the ones that gave me a hard time in trying to understand the concept of what I'm trying to do in said project. And in my opinion, I think that leads to a better storytelling in terms of like problem solution and learning lesson to the people who are interviewing you when they ask you, hey, what is this project about? So instead of me just saying what it does, I could give them a story and try to help them see how I can connect with it
mm-hmm.
to show them how you can persevere through adversity.
I like that.
Yeah.
Shamir, putting you on the spot now.
I know. I guess a way I like to point out, I guess my failures and how I overcome them is kind of speaking it out. Lately, I'm involved in a lot of Twitter spaces, which are pretty much live podcasts, and a lot of them are geared toward people who are looking to transition to tech, and probably had a lot of fears that I had in the beginning, thinking I wasn't smart enough to do this. That I had to be this mad crazy scientist to be a software engineer and
You
to
still could be.
meet. Oh yeah, of course. Definitely. And just speaking to and communicating with a lot of different people from different backgrounds, and seeing how they were able to kind of transition. I've spoken to people who are like in the medical field, people who are teachers, um, all sorts of backgrounds, and to see that they had the perseverance, as we mentioned earlier, to keep trying. And I like to see failure as look at failure as an opportunity, not as like, oh my god, I can't do this. It's an opportunity to grow, and as we mentioned earlier, it's an opportunity to learn. So when you really switch that mindset, I think it you know helps easy. I mean, like I said, imposter syndrome, something that's not going to
Mm-hmm.
go away. It's something that's always going to be there, and
Still hits
you really
me
gotta
even
learn.
even today. Absolutely,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. Which is, I remember when you first told me and Lewis that we were like, "What?" We were
Yeah.
shocked. Because you've been coding
Oh,
for a long time.
there's that creeping fear every project I start. Every project.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. And it's
So,
things like statements like that, like coming from an experienced engineer, it's really
mm-hmm.
encouraging to me that, where it's not just us, we're not alone in this feeling.
No.
And it'll get better with time. I know there's a lot of concepts in coding
Uh,
I don't get and or still struggle with, but I know that if
well,
I
it depends on this. It
persevere,
depends on the scenarios. I mean, imposter syndrome
right.
for me. Every time I start a new project, there's always that nagging fear: is it going to go the way I want it to go? I had a coworker come onto the project that I'm on now, almost a year into code being written by the team as I was helping to direct and training folks, bringing them up to speed on front end technologies. And he's as good as I am, easily. So you don't think that imposter syndrome was kicking in, going, oh my God, is he going to look at my code and say it's horrible? You know, I'm studying cloud tech. Anybody that's followed me on Twitter probably has seen me throw up some stuff on the studies that I'm doing there, right? And man, there's just so much to learn. If somebody were to say to me tomorrow, hey, we need you to build this whatever in the cloud, that imposter syndrome is going to be running rampant at that point, right?
Yeah.
Um, I know Java, I know .NET, I know both of them reasonably well enough that I can do code reviews and things like that. But if somebody says, "Hey, Bob, we need you to fix this bug," and it's in Java, and irregardless of how much time I spend in Java, some part of me is still going to cringe. I prefer front end. That's where I love to spend my time. I do like to reach outside. Failure is a powerful thing.
Yep.
At leading edge, education is a part of what we do, and we realize that really to learn well, a lot of times you have to step out of your comfort zone. And you two have to admit, when you started 100 Devs, you were stepping way outside your comfort zone,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Way outside. But look at where it put you, right? You guys are on an amazing path. Failure is a powerful thing that can help. And Lewis, I'm sorry we didn't get your name on the last slide. I forgot that one. I apologize. So
It's okay. It's okay. We learn. It's you try and try again.
I
That's how it
I
is.
failed. I made a
Yeah.
mistake here. Yeah. And those of you
Now
who aren't
and
playing
now we
Zoom
learned.
game, go back to the beginning of the slide deck. Rewatch the whole thing again. Yeah. All right, guys. Anything else before we wrap this up here?
Um, just keep going.
Hmm.
There will be times where you feel like you're going through an uphill battle, and that's completely normal. Just keep going through perseverance and grit and consistency. Um, you're gonna succeed, and just know that not every day will be the same. Sometimes you will work harder than the other days, but as long as you put in that work, the results will show. So that's my ending statement.
When you were talking about the challenges, I think the word that jumped into my mind was sometimes they feel insurmountable.
Yes.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's the time where you got two choices. You can dig in, and I do. I've got that stubborn streak in me. I'll dig in. I'll bang my head against the wall for 24, 48 hours on a problem. But I also want to say that sometimes it's okay to step away from that failure and come back at it later. Sometimes giving your subconscious that chance to kind of recoup, possibly come at it in a different direction. You're not always going to
Yeah.
consciously solve the problem. Sometimes your brain is pretty intelligent in how it solves problems, and it's good to take that break. So, Shamir, any thoughts?
Yeah. Uh, and that, yeah, I love this conversation. And I want to encourage everyone to keep trying and fail and try again because you will fail. It's not a matter of
We
if,
we all do.
it's we all do. And yeah, don't be afraid to go through this alone. I want to encourage people that because I know if I went through this process by myself, I probably wouldn't be here today. And so, don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to speak up. Um, if you do, you know, the failure is really bad
Yeah.
enough where you've hit a wall, reach
And,
out, speak up,
and
ask questions.
you're absolutely right. That community aspect is so important.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
realistically, what we're talking about here is writing code. Most often, you're going to be writing code as a part of a team. It's a team. It's not an individual.
Right.
There will be people there that are better at it than you. There will be people there that are worse than you. You're there to help each other and to move the code forward. And so it's not really just your failure. It's part of the team as well. That team should be there to support you. I like that. That's awesome. I think
Yep.
that's a great place to kind of wrap it up on. And any other quick thoughts before we wrap up?
Oh, said what we needed to.
All right, said what we needed to. Awesome. I'm going to stop the record here. And maybe.